see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Sure.
So should we move on to the second section of our agenda?
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to learn more about your journey, how you started on empathy, what's worked for you, what hasn't. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about your story.
I think we kind of covered that in that initial interview. I can't remember quite what we did cover, but so it's kind of like you're wondering, like, how did I kind of get interested in empathy in general, and kind of how is it kind of developed? Is that the
exactly
idea?
You told us that you tried a lot of things, but we didn't get into them.
Okay. Well, I think it kind of stemmed, when I was, kind of growing up, I was kind of maybe influenced by the '60s, because I was kind of in high school in the early '70s, and I wanted to learn by doing. So I kind of got out of high school in 3 years, graduated, and then started traveling around the world. So was kind of like a real seeker, that watching movie, travel, reading travel books, and, Siddhartha and all that kind of stuff. So just spent, 10 years kind of traveling and seeking, just trying to understand, kind of grow personally by doing. And so I was kind of had like a seeking, looking for kind of what was, really important in life. And I started off as a evangelical Christian, so rather conservative. And as I kind of traveled with and kind of connected to all these people around the world, I kind of slowly lost all my religiosity and really started seeing the importance of relating to people kind of at a values level. So just, seeing the humanity of people, the, kindness, the generosity, creativity, and so became interested in values in general. And also traveled, met someone that we traveled with a lot, and he was a seeker as well, and he would always take one value and just really focus on it and go in depth. And for like 6 months, he'd be talking nothing except that value, be justice or peace or love or whatever. So I thought, hey, that's a really good methodology, take one value in life, kind of zoom in on it, and just talk to everybody. It's kind of like what you're doing. You just talk to everybody about it, get their feedback on it, have dialogues about it. And so I did some of that, and that became kind of like a way of kind of exploring, learning, and then got into the computer field when I stopped traveling. And I did go to college and went to like 6 different universities to get my bachelor degree in United States, Germany, and Indonesia. So it was like, that was just from my bachelor's degree. So just, always trying different things. Then kind of got into the computer field and, worked at that for, a while, and kind of wanted to do more with the humanities. And so I started, kind of got out of that, out of the computer field, had a background, with Microsoft back office, and so it was kind of mid '80s. Got into computers, and then later on did more traveling. I don't know. So I'm kind of going around and around here, but it was. So anyway, I kind of wanted to do more with human values, so I kind of started doing some documentary projects, exploring what trust is, what inspiration is, and have a lot of those videos online. And then, when George Bush was in office, there was a lot of talk about conservative values, and I'd kind of seen myself as more of a progressive. And so I said, well, what are progressive values? So I did, a couple hundred interviews, interviewing people about their values, and they'd tell me things like caring and justice or peace or nonviolence or responsibility. But I found that when people talked about caring, and I said, tell me a story about caring, I mean, it's like they would start tearing up, telling these stories. Like there was one story, a guy said, he was Hispanic, and he was saying how his father during the Depression worked on the railroads in a town, in the Southwest. And you know, there'd be hobos and so forth, and they'd fall off the trains and they'd get killed because, you know, just hopping trains. And he said his father would take him to the grave, you know, the person is being buried, like, you know, like virtually an unmarked grave, you know, nobody's there. And he said, somebody has to be here. You know, people can't just die by themselves. There should be somebody there. And for him, you know, that was like learning a lesson about caring. And he just like would tear up about it. So I saw the importance of caring in people's lives, and then it kind of led me more and more to the importance of empathy as the underlying value of caring. It's like, why do we care? It's because, you know, I kind of am in your shoes. I feel who you are. I feel, you know, your humanity. And then also read some of the work of George Lakoff, who was saying progressive values are based on empathy. And then Barack Obama also ran on the saying the country has an empathy deficit. So I started focusing on empathy and, you know, started doing interviews. And kind of the more and more I got into it, the more I saw that this was really what I'd been kind of like searching for in terms of connecting, you know, with other people and the importance of it. And that this was really kind of like this core value of how we connect with others. So, you know, I've kind of just kind of gotten into it more and more, and then learning all the different processes for empathy, you know, the reflective listening, you know, empathic listening, how do you do mindfulness, uh, you know, the stories people have, how do you listen to the stories, and so just been getting more and more into it, and really seeing how it is the thing that is really the for problem solving, for conflict. It's really the way to resolve conflicts. It's like, and then I took conflict resolution, you know, training, and it's all how when people are at loggerheads, how you dissolve that and get people to connect together. So it's almost like a magical thing, as well as relationships. You know, the best relationships is, you know, when you're with someone that you really empathize with and empathizes with you, and you kind of have a deep, you know, deep connection with them. And for me, I see it as the first steps towards caring and love. So so just kind of going on, you know, deeper and deeper into it, I just thought, well, actually, all of society needs more empathy. So initially, I was going to make a documentary about it, but then I see we really need to get a whole cause. So it's like, how do we do that? And so really, I've just been kind of studying it, learning about it, kind of academically as well as experientially, you know, using a lot of different type of workshop processes and so forth, nonviolent communication, compassionate listening, mediation, and so yeah, so that's kind of where I am. So it's like, now, how do I go about creating more empathy? And, you know, I think one other thing that I want to say is how it really impacted me personally is, you know, I grew up in the 60s, so it's kind of like that generation gap between, you know, families, and, you know, and we would fight all the time about, you know, like conservative versus progressive viewpoints. And I really, now with my family, I don't really argue with them. I just try to empathize, you know, really hear what is it that's, you know, going on for them. You know, what are their deeper feelings and deeper needs? So it's really starting to change. I can see how it's actually, you know, for myself personally, changing my way of relating to people. And it's so much more fulfilling way of being, is to kind of ground myself in empathy and try to nurture that. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of like so it kind of brings me to the point, you know, where I am now is, you know, how to build a movement around it. And I still see myself as a real learner. You know, I kind of have that seeking. How do I grow more deeply and being more empathic? How do I understand it? How can we transform society? And so I always ask people now, the question is, how do we build a culture of empathy? So I'm starting to put together a kind of a blueprint for that. So I'm kind of like in the middle of it, and it's still not quite, you know, it's still not quite shaped yet, but it's starting to take form. So
that when you have it together.
Yeah, I have a web page for it, Blueprint. So I'm just starting to put lists there. It's on the website, so you can always check it out there.
Blueprint.
It's cultureofempathy.com, and then on the sidebar is Blueprint. It's like, oh, let's see, it's how to build empathy, how to build empathy. And then it says there how to build a culture of empathy. And so it's things like, create a vision. We need a vision of what does a culture of empathy look like. And then it's the intention. Why do people even want to be empathic? Why do people even want to nurture and foster that? And so there's a bunch of other points there, like, and, how do we build a culture of empathy is, I see one way is dialoguing about it. Just talk about it, ask people about it, keep bringing it up. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the Facebook page. I keep creating a dialogue there, create different causes around it, do interviews. And I'm seeing kind of the conference, doing this online conference is one way of kind of stimulating dialogue. So, I'm still looking for ideas too. It's so what I really like about what you're talking about is the aspect of, with your project, is creating the container, because you can't, it's like, how do you create a structure that people can come together, connect, and then create that, use their creativity. And so the whole approach you're kind of doing, the design school, some of it I think you're using approach of, kind of a methodology of bringing people together and having them tap into their creativity. That's something I'd also like to really, explore more as well. So that's kind of like the short of it for now. I don't know if you have any questions about that or comments.
Well, it's interesting, the idea of building a culture of empathy. The one insight that I would take from what we found is that you really have to speak differently to the different segments that we've identified. Like, because I experienced it firsthand when I was in Colombia. Like, I could not use the questionnaires that we had created to start off of here as a group there. I had to speak about it in a very different way, using very different different language. And I mean, those three segments are pretty marked, we found. And they require different language and different approaches and different. We're gonna have to move a little bit.
Yeah, we have to plug in the battery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in our interviews, a lot of people seem to say, and even Ashoka mentions it in their findings. They know it's not it's everyone. That every group is distinct, every culture is distinct. But in general, we found that those three major groups really they're broad enough so that if you have the language to speak to those, then it'll be easier. You'll be more successful in spreading that culture of empathy.
Yeah, so you're wanting to have a vocabulary of how to speak with those different communities.
Yeah.
And in terms of how, I mean, there's kind of different aspects. One is you can talk about empathy and kind of have, these different models of empathy. And the other is to just empathize with people too. You know what I mean? It's just to kind of reflect, really hear deeply what their concerns are.
Yeah, I think some of the tools in fact, the tools I think apply from segment to segment, are pretty universal, but it's the way you use them, the way you introduce them, the way you talk about them, and the container that you put it all in, I think does have to be different for each segment. Well, I mean, at least that's what we found in our research.
Do you have like a example of that? I'm having a little trouble understanding. I know you're saying you have to kind of speak differently to the different people, but how would that look? Well,
let's say if I were gonna, I mean, maybe in terms of, because I was thinking about your work in the sustainability world, like when you were trying to sell the green homes to people,
Right.
it really had to become like you're saving versus you're saving
Right.
money versus you're saving the homes.
I mean, if you're dealing with a culture that maybe faces a lot of sort of self-identity issues, or there's a lot of kind of risk factors or fear, you know, and that's kind of their main barrier in empathizing with, you know, another culture that holds different ideologies than them, then the number one need is most likely to address those barriers in eliminating the risk factors, eliminating the fear factors. And that's how you're going to, you know, more successfully facilitate building an empathy bridge between those two cultures. So if the number one need is, you know, eliminating the fear, then we have to create an environment that is safe.
And how do you eliminate the fear?
Well, we're still figuring that out, I think.
But it's key to identify what the needs are, so
Right.
that you can, because for each particular segment, because it'll be more likely that you'll get through if you're creating the conditions or the environment that that group needs.
Yeah. I think some of the tools that we had identified in helping people connect with that actually specifically have to do with, you know, eliminating the fear is, where's that part about? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, having a disinterested third party as a mediator. So there's no, you know, risk of corruption. There's no risk of sort of biases if you're dealing with two different groups.
So, for example, in restorative justice, that mediation is really important. In conflict resolution, you see it as well. It's very important. We've also seen, for example, technologies to be also a third party that, or a tool or a channel actually that eliminates that fear factor. So you'll be more likely perhaps to talk to someone who's very different from you if you don't feel physically threatened, if it's online perhaps. So all those are good things to keep in mind when you are trying to foster a culture of empathy.
Right.
Well, one thing in terms of fear, something I've seen is when I went to the Republican state convention here when it was here in San Jose, and I went there and I said, "Hey, I'm here to interview you about empathy. I just want to find out what your views are about empathy." And they said, "Great, we're so happy you're here because you always get our bum rap that we're always seen as being heartless." So they were very gracious there. They gave me a press pass, you know, introduced me to people, you know, took me around the convention. They introduced me to people. And there was a couple of young Republicans there that I said, "Well, tell me, what are your values?" Which is, I would say, is another word for needs as well. It's like, you know, what's important to you? And the one guy said, you know, protection, you know, if we're, you know, we're going to protect ourselves. So it's like, how do you deal with a situation like that, where it's like protection, you know, we're afraid something might happen, you know, we're going to protect ourselves. And what I found is I just would listen. I would say, I would do that mirrored empathy and say, so protection is really important to you. And, you know, just mirroring back what I'm hearing. And he said, that's right, you know, we're going to defend ourselves. So, you know, protection is really important, and you're wanting a sense of security. He says, yeah, we want security. We're going to protect ourselves. And anybody come into my house, you know, he didn't say it, but kind of implying I got my guns or whatever, you know. And so I said, and so I just reflected, just listened for the deeper feelings and underlying values of what was important to, and it was a sense of security. And I can really resonate with it. I want to feel secure too. But what I did in that conversation was to find the fear, and, you know, we're kind of tapping into the fear of somebody breaking into this, you know, his house, and he wants to protect himself. And then so I said, so what you're concerned about is that there's people out there who aren't empathizing with you and that would break into your house and cause you harm. because your friends empathize with you. They're not going to do that because they know how you feel. So you're concerned that there's people out there who don't have empathy for you. And he says, yeah, I guess so. You know, and it was like, yeah. So, and he says, yeah, I guess empathy is important. You know, it's really, important thing to have empathy in the world. I said, yeah. So what can we do to create more empathy? How can we work together to create more empathy? And then there was three of these young Republicans there, and then the other one, he had this, let me demonstrate it here. He had a smartphone, and he said, "I got to show you something." And he brought up, he says, "A friend of mine, he's this total self-centered jerk, just thinking about himself." And then his mother was dying of cancer. She'd gotten and one of the last things she did is he wrote him a letter, and I happened to have it on my phone. And he said, "I'd like to read it to you." And I said, "Okay, sure." And he brought it up, and he started reading it. It was just a short letter, and it went like, "Son, it's so important that you care about other people. That you'll see as you get older, and when you die, that's really the most important thing in life, is that you have that connection and caring with other people." And he kind of went through the whole letter, and he says, "This changed my friend's life." It's like his mother died, and it was, he's just turned around, and maybe like what you're saying about, being more socially engaged and caring. And so what I wanted to just say about that is the narrative of how that story went. A lot of people, somebody says, we got to protect ourselves, we need our guns or whatever. They'll say, no, you don't need it. They go in, they deny what the person's experience is. You're talking about the police officer, whoever it was, their security person, that needs that sense of protection. And if you go and say, no, you don't need protection, they're going to get on guard and not trust you. But if you just try to hear what the deeper feelings and needs and values of the people are, and really resonate with them, really feel them, so that those feelings become, your own feeling as well. So you just kind of become one in kind of an understanding. And then it's like, then the question is, how do we work together to create a culture of empathy? Because your fears, the majority of fears to me seem to really stem out of a lack of empathy. The in-group is like fear of the other because the other doesn't have empathy for us. So we have to shut off our empathy for them. At least that's how I kind of see it. So it's like, how do we acknowledge everyone's fear and make the connection of their fear to it being a lack of empathy? And how do we actually work together to create more empathy together? So that's kind of like a, kind of one aspect that that I've kind of come to see that's important.
I love the example of the letter. One of the things that we've identified is that those life-changing experiences, those moments, expedite the whole process of spreading a culture of empathy. So I don't know, maybe it's an area of opportunity to design these types of experiences or create opportunities for them. One of them, and the one that I've heard on your life journey, is travel. Travel hasn't been designed or put out there necessarily with that in mind, with the idea of empathy behind it. But what if it was? What if design a venture that used travel to spread empathy? Or they created, there's workshops and retreats that you've also mentioned before that change people's lives. The way that they do things after it. It could be a 3-day retreat, a 1-week retreat, and all of a sudden, like a 5-minute letter, it sort of expedites the whole process. It creates this shift of mindset. So maybe that's an area of opportunity in order to help speed up the process or push it along, the process of spreading a culture of empathy.
Yeah, it's that moment, the transformation, where people really connect with each other, and then something new kind of comes out of that. And how are you creating that? How are you fostering that transformation? And it sounds like, like travel is a big one, right? It's like you get out there and you meet other people, and it's like your notions of how things are kind of changes because you're kind of interacting and seeing the humanity of people all around the world.
So that's why we created that third branch that's called experiential empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Because those experiences you're not just imagining it or mirroring it, you're living it. They have the potential to create those life-changing experiences that can shift you into that mindset of empathy.
Yeah. So it's really putting kind of physically kind of doing something. Like there's something called the empathy belly, I think it is. Men can put on this empathy suit. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that, but yeah. So you actually can feel what it's like to be a woman and pregnant, right? Carrying the weight and what it does to your body. And there's also these suits of for old age, right? It's like they give you fogged glasses and do all kinds of stuff that really makes you feel what it's like to be old. So that's kind of the experiential, where you're actually feeling it viscerally, or living in a slum or spending some time in a slum. So maybe that's like the experiential part of traveling.
One of your interviews, I forget who you were interviewing, but he talked about the extreme sport of empathy, of experiential empathy. And he mentions the industrial designer that put on that old suit to design better for old people. And he called, I don't remember his name, but the man
Roman Krasnarek is, I think, probably who you're talking about. Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly, that interview. So he talks about looking at it as being more adventurous about your empathy endeavors. And so that whole language I really liked and got inspired by. Thinking of it as an extreme sport or as an adventure.
Yeah, I just saw something from Maya Salovitz. I interviewed her, and she was just saying, we have to make empathy sexy. It's like there's a lot of this, I think, especially in the compassion field, right? It's like, oh, compassion for people suffering. You get kind of tired of the suffering part. There's also, empathy kind of doubles your fun.
Yeah.
Right? It doubles your creativity, it doubles the joy, it doubles the enthusiasm. So it's kind of like focusing on that part as well.
Having that discussion, one of the ways that we were thinking about it is to think about the term cosmopolitanism as a reflection of empathy.
Yeah.
That's a way to make empathy look or feel more sexy, I guess, instead of soft and fluffy.
Because the term actually refers to, being a citizen of like a common humanity, which, has a lot in common with empathy. But when you hear of the term cosmopolitan, it has much different connotations than empathy. So like I think had said before, a lot of people related the term empathy to suffering and, kind of bad feelings or feeling for someone in need. But it doesn't have to be like that, So, what if we could encourage a shift in language from empathy towards cosmopolitanism, which does have that kind of sexier, kind of, modern sort of feel to the language. But it does share a lot of similarities in terms of values and understanding.
I heard Barack Obama give a talk. I think it was at Notre Dame, and he said, "Be the crossroads." He was talking about empathy, and then he said about being the crossroads. So I think it's kind of like what you're trying to get at with the cosmopolitan. Is the crossroad is where all the roads cross, so you meet people from all sides, and I think it's that kind of that openness, which, I mean, it's kind of cosmopolitan right here, right? I mean, are you from Japan?
No.
Oh, you're just... So, but see, you're from, I don't know. So anyway, there's just this cosmopolitan of just coming from a lot of different cultures. And I mean, you just went to Japan, I guess, but Shanna.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have some great notes here from our conversation so far. I don't know. I'm struggling a little bit as to how to move forward with. It's sort of more of a brainstorming session, given we're at a distance. I don't know. Do you have any ideas, Edwin, how we can?
Not really. You're wanting to kind of put ideas up on the wall, right?
Yeah, maybe one good thing, since we were talking about travel and experiential empathy, one good thing that we could do now is try to map out the empathy market. You've talked to so many people, you know a lot of the activity that's going on. One of the exercises that we do, that we've learned to do, is to map out the market and see where there's areas for opportunity. So what's saturated, what's not. So for example, there's a lot of work going on in conflict resolution, some work going on in dialogue, dialoguing. Maybe not so much done in the experiential part. So maybe, do you want to go with us through that exercise of mapping out?
Sure. So the markets, what are the markets? So you start with that?
Sure.
Is there something we should pull up, like the other computer maybe?
Yeah, I'll look for that.
I don't have my computer.
Sorry, Edwin, this might be a minute delay here.
Sure, no problem.
Just set up.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.